Safe between the sheets. Roisin was a bit of a classic. Tall, slim, good figure, good face, intelligent, strong, all that stuff. No major problems, no major craziness. Manus always got the crazy ones, the hurt ones, hurt in one way or another. Not love when they were kids or damaged in some other way. He got the damaged. He usually got the uneducated too. He was uneducated himself, but a reader of books and a dreamer. And here he was, sat opposite, healthy, intelligent, good thing. He wondered if she was married. She couldn't be on her own, just sat on her own in a flat somewhere. It was funny. She knew most everything about him. He knew nothing of her. Manus had moved to County Clare in Ireland, and Roisin was his career guidance counsellor. Her job was to help him realise what job he could realistically go for and be happy in. It was especially good for him. The chance to sit and talk on a one-to-one with a pretty young, healthy, good thing. A positive input in his life. For her, it was part of her job. For him, it was like a date. He was healthy enough. He wasn't strung out on drugs, and he felt good about himself. But it was a lonely enough life he led. He's a stranger in a strange town again. Seemed like for years and years he'd never been anything else. At least this time he was back in Ireland, and he had a friend from his childhood living in the same town. Of course, his friend was married with a child, and although Manus found it great to be able to visit, still he was never sure how much he was intruding on the family's intimacy. It was lonely never being intimate with anyone yourself. Never mind the lack of sex, the physical body contact deprivation, in fact, every kind of contact deprivation. His most intimate relationship with a girl, paid for by the government to help him, one of the long-term unemployed, find a job. She said she wanted to get a general picture of him and gave him a form to fill in. He found the form hard work and gave her some stories she'd written saying that they painted a general picture. She read some of them, but found the coarse sex scenes unpalatable. She was a bit schoolmamish, prudish and proper. They would sit and talk for an hour or two twice a week, always about him. It wasn't part of her job to talk about her, and it was just a job, not a date. He was an awkward client for her. He couldn't fill in the questionnaires. He couldn't be labelled accurately. He didn't fit in any of the boxes. He dismissed his working life as shit, shovel and donkey work. In truth, he didn't have much of a working life. Mostly he'd just been on the dole, sold hash, taken drugs. She sat on her own, watching TV with a bottle of wine on a Friday night. Imagine that. Big miss, healthy, good thing, all on her own on a Friday night. This little piece of information was let drop over coffee round a table where they sat for their informal little chats. Manus wondered if Big Miss was lonely for the feel of another human being. He could imagine himself with her. He could imagine her naked body. He wondered what kind of bloke she would really be with. Someone tall and thin like herself. An accountant, a solicitor, a professional. He would have a high forehead, receding thin hair. Manus spent too much time on his own, and then fixated on the first woman he had contact with. The slightest gesture of kindness magnified through his well of loneliness. He looked at her with his pleading puppy dog eyes. She wouldn't fall for that. He felt ridiculous to have ever considered that she might. She wore ankle boots with platform heels. He would look at the flesh above her ankle boots, below her trouser legs. He thought she was tall and slim, like a young willow sapling. He asked her why she wore high heels when she was already so tall. "I've been through this before," she snapped. She'd been through it with her ex-boyfriend. "I can be as tall as I choose." Vance was pleased with the breakdown in her defence. "Oh yeah, it wasn't a criticism. We're stilts." In a few minutes she went red, because she had talked to him on a personal level, when she meant to keep him at all times as a client. She looked nice when she went red. Vulnerable, human, girlish. He pushed her for who she was. She'd been to school, then in university, where she'd got a degree in business studies, and realised she wouldn't last 6 months in the business world. She'd done government-sponsored jobs like teaching travellers' kids. She'd studied more and got more diplomas. She had lived in Dublin, then left, lock, stock, and barrel. She had been to the States. She lived now back in her hometown. She enjoyed her work. She more or less had a free hand. She could get the likes of manus free driving lessons and ask him about his network, who he lived with, and tell him it was none of his business when he asked her who she lived with. He wondered if she might just be on her own. She'd never think of it with him. She photocopied the Irish Writer's Guide and highlighted possible outlets for his stories. She brought him books to read, autobiographical books like his. He never read them. She asked him if he benefited from their sessions. He said he did. They were a pleasure. And when she said, "But are they of any value?" he answered, "Pleasure is of value." It was true. A pretty young, healthy, good thing, taking an interest in him, talking to him, albeit in a professional capacity only, had a positive effect on him. But it was going on too long. In a professional capacity, there were limits to the road they were on. At the end of the road, they had to separate. No betting each other. No walking, talking, going to the pub with the pictures. His unexpressed thoughts and stifled feelings were a palpable, pulsing force in the office. She asked if he had a problem. "No," he lied. "Do you have a problem?" "No," she answered. She asked where he wanted it to go. Really, there was nowhere for it to go. He had no excuse for coming down to see her. He went out feeling foolish. Him and her. He was an idiot. Intelligent, well-educated, reasonably played. Healthy, good thing. With him, idiot. He went and had his eyes tested for his driving lessons. He had his hair shaved off, as though that might somehow shave away all his stupid thoughts, make him feel different. He felt foolish to have exposed his lonely vulnerability and ridiculous hopes for compatibility with the healthy, needless, well-protected, self-sufficient Roisin. Logically, rationally, they were not compatible. She had suggested he take one of the characters from his stories and write from their point of view. He asked her to give him her point of view. She said she wouldn't like him to write about her. He said he already had. In truth, the Irish girls were a mystery to him. He had left Ireland in his youth. Besides, this was a very different part of Ireland than the part he had been brought up in. There were courtship rituals he was unfamiliar with. Do you want to go to the pictures? A dance? How was it done? Alice's sexual experiences were mostly limited to poor English girls. Social welfare mothers, junkies, dealers, prostitutes, small-time hustlers. Girls who came to him for sex, affection, love and protection. He phoned Roisin to say he had got his provisional licence. She said she couldn't find the address of the instructor she, acting on behalf of the government strategy to help the long-term unemployed, had paid for. She could have told him that she would send the address out to him, but she didn't. She asked him to come down. He was keen too, even though he knew that nothing would be happening between them. Still, he wanted to enjoy her company, no problem. In cut-off jeans and number one haircut, he trembled in her office as he poured the coffee. "You got a haircut?" "Yeah, it was too hot." "So you just cut it off?" "Yeah." She wore a sleeveless t-shirt, flesh radiant. In talking about the medias he could try and get published in, Roisin asked if he ever tried the newspapers or telly. He said he could hardly read them or watch it. She asked him why. "Because I can't focus on them. They just talk shit and they lie. I remember the 30th of January 1972, friends phoned up from Derry crying that there were bodies lying on the street, people slaughtered, and then at the same time it was on the telly about the brave soldiers defending the realm." He felt stupid then. He would have liked to explain about the streets behind the Elmo Bakery during the 70s, when Catholics were persuaded to move. Persuasion methods ranging from spitting and name-calling to getting firebombed or shot dead at your doorstep. It would be too dangerous to walk home at night. Gangs roamed the streets, tartan gangs just looking for a take to kick to death. The Crown Security Forces, if they didn't actually actively encourage the tartans, certainly did nothing to hinder them. One summer, A Dutch journalist friend of Manus's mother gave Manus a holiday in Holland, so he missed Harry's murder. Harry was murdered while waiting for his girlfriend to come out of the entry where she was having a piss. They were all a bit crazy, the boys on the street. Drugs they took, acid and hash, speed and downers. They were mixed, takes and prods. They would have been literally murdered if they had tried going in any of the prod bars, but they were not that popular in take bars either. They were just tolerated. Long-haired drug takers. Some of them prods. Harry's dad was an RUC pig, and there was a son stood at the bar, long hair, blonde hair down to his ass. Anyway, back then Manus wasn't even in the country when one of his Protestant friends was gunned down by loyalists because they didn't want Harry to be friends with Catholics, and Harry wouldn't stop being friends with Catholics. Manus was spat on and beaten, stoned and chased. Mostly for Manus' life in Belfast in the 70s was boring or dangerous. He sat in a lot and watched the news on TV. The news was bigoted lies. The police and army were nice guys doing a difficult job. They did not torture, and they did not murder, and they were not sectarian. That's what the news said. But no, I don't read the papers or watch the box much. They just talk shite and lies, Manus said to Roisin. Manus took his first driving lesson. He was stiff and fearful that he would lose control and all notion of how to regain it. He had a little difficulty explaining to his instructor how he had reached his 40s and never driven a car. I just had no interest, he said, instead of, because I was fucked from drugs. Didn't want to do nothing except take more drugs. Because the drugs had actually frazzled a part of his brain. So part of him couldn't, and part of him didn't want to be a successful, competent, capable, red-blooded Western male with or without a flash car. He got through the lesson. He called on his childhood friend Paddy, who lived in the same town. Paddy's partner, Siobhan, was just out of the bath, drying herself in the living room. Wrapped in towels, she welcomed Manus in. Paddy was typing upstairs, and Manus could also hear Saoirse, their child, playing a game of make-believe with herself. Manus went into the kitchen and made 3 teas. Saoirse came into the kitchen to be picked up. She was 4 years old. She wrapped her arms around his neck and legs around his body and squeezed hard and kissed him on the cheek. Innocent and beautiful. When Paddy and Siobhan came in for their tea, Manus talked again about his infatuation with Roisin and the possibilities of them getting together sometime. Dream on, laughed Paddy. And Manus did dream. Safe between the clean sheets, Roisin ran her hands across her body. Breasts, belly, thighs, pubic hair. She thought of Alan. She thought of Sean, her exes. She thought of Manus, a strangely boy-like man who had recently become one of her clients at work. Safe between the sheets, she wet her fingertips and rubbed her clitoris. Thoughts gave way to sensations. Her muscles tightened. She squirmed and squeezed out a hot shot of her sweet stuff. In the morning, after her shower, she dressed in purple panties and bra. She looked in the mirror critically as she put on black tights. Her breasts were small and her legs thin. Pert, not small, and slim, not thin, she assured herself. She was healthy. She looked it. She breakfasted leisurely before driving to work. She had a good life. Her wage was reasonable and the job was pleasant. Her clients were unemployed people, and it was her job to advise and facilitate them towards careers and jobs. Some of it was quite interesting. She even enjoyed the hour-long drive to work. The road was not overpopulated, the houses emphasising rather than detracting from the wide open space. One of the grander houses along the road always stood out with its large red cornerstones and a pretty vegetable and herb garden. A woman in her later years was often in plain view, tending the garden. Her back seemed very straight. Her hair, once raven black, now had great shocks of grey. She was always alone, but never looked lonely, just wrapped up in her garden and house, self-contained. For Roisin, there was something both appealing and disconcerting in the image, like a recognition of what she herself might turn out like in years to come. There was something wrong with the colour printout on the computer, and she was on the office floor examining a faulty circuit when Manus called. Pauline, Roisin's workmate, smiled a secret shared between her and Roisin. She had seen the card, a pretty little flowery thing Manus had sent thanking Roisin for the note she had hand-delivered to his door, along with the educational possibilities that were open to him. Roisin, it's Manus. He was told to have a seat and sat drinking in the minimal view of Roisin's flesh. She had a scar on her left forearm. It had once been a deep rip, and he wanted to ask how it had happened. He wanted to ask, but it was none of his business, the personal details of her private life. Roisin put the faulty circuit back in the machine and agreed with Pauline that it would be cheaper to buy a new one rather than have it fixed. Speaking to Manus, Roisin said he was an hour early for the computer class, which she was teaching and he had enrolled in. She said she would make him coffee. She asked if he had any replies. He had sent some stories off to a magazine. But if he had had any replies, she would have been the first to know. He would have asked her out to celebrate. She poured him coffee, and he asked her a personal question. It's just a general, non-intrusive, and so acceptable question. So how's yourself? She was fine. Within the office was her domain. He couldn't draw her out, and there was no room to manoeuvre. He wanted so much to get more personal, but knew he couldn't. He didn't want her like this. He wanted her on equal terms, as interested in him as he was in her, with as much to offer her as she could offer him. He left her and went outside to smoke a cigarette, then went into the computer room alone. He started typing up his usual style of stuff. Well, what the fuck am I doing here? The rest of the class came in, slow learners and people with bad starts in life. This was his class. She gave them a piece to copy about the Loch Ness Monster, which he copied for a bit, but then went back to writing his own stuff again. When she came over to him, she sensed his unease at having his writing looked at before it was completed. Oh, get your hands off my stuff, she laughed, and it was too close to the bone for poor Manus. Like it was all he really wanted, her hands on his stuff. He carried on writing, described her dress, described her coming over and looking and making her comment, and he made the joke on screen that he hadn't said out loud about her hands being welcome on his stuff. And class was over. He stalled until the rest of the class left, as though he had some business, personal business with her. He didn't give her his file, just left it beside the computer. If she wanted to see what he had written, she could look. She didn't look. She wasn't interested. She was just doing her job. He was just chancing his arm, pushing his luck, milking a situation that wasn't absolutely as dry as a bone, but certainly wasn't juicy either. See you next week in the computer class, he said, and they parted. Driving back that evening, the sky was as large as ever. The old woman was still in her garden, long grey hair blowing behind her. Never mind. Soon the night would come, and Roisin would be safe again between the sheets. Manus rationalised that it was only being on his own so much that magnified the importance of any point of contact with another human being. A smile, a few words. Alone in his room, he would savour, indeed feed off such small affections. His malnourished heart extracting life force from a casual kindness. He had to break out. Martin, a young Geordie who had just moved into the house Manus shared, asked Manus out for a pint. They went to Kelly's bar, where the bar staff looked like a Robert Palmer video. Lots of healthy young girls, tight jeans, short skirts and bare bellies. The music played loud, the speed bikes on the telescreens looked good, as did the pretty people in the bar. The Guinness and the pitchers of cider disappeared down his throat. Some girls waved and smiled. He had seen them before, danced with them maybe. He blew them a kiss. He wondered where Roisin was. She was at a wedding reception, rejecting a tall, thin accountant in favour of a more robust brickie. She fancied a bit of rough, really, and at least he was still a good earner. Manus shook his head in derision. His fantasy was turning obsessional. Another girl came past and hugged him. Without rising from his low stool, he put his arm around her, pressing his head into her belly, kissed her arm. The contact was so natural, effortless. As she walked on, his hand went back and grabbed her calf, held it lightly for half a second and let it go. She was a good looker, had a nice vibe, but he didn't want to fall in love or get involved. A shag would have been grand, but there would have been a person at the end of it, And what would he have done with another one of those? In his mind, he already had one. He shook his head again. Perhaps it was all he needed to burst this silly bubble of a fantasy he had about Roisin. A real person, a human body next to his. Saturday night, Michael Byrne called. He was writing an epic poem about a storyteller in old Ireland. The storyteller was pleased with his work in life, but it got lonely always writing poems in praise of nobles and kings, helping them to woo their ladies and never wooing his own. His own lady lived in Wales, and the king granted the storyteller permission to go to Wales and try for his love. The king gave him cattle, which he herded to the coast, encountering many adventures on the way. When he reached the coast, he skinned the cattle to make a boat and sailed across to Wales. At the last moment, he lost faith in himself. What had he got to offer? Nothing but words. He plucked up his courage and made his play and won the woman. Everybody likes a happy ending. Sunday, Paddy's band were playing in Brannigan's bar. Nance was too tired and too skint, but he went down anyway just to show support. There were a couple of women at Brian's gig, at Paddy's gig, who flashed signs of interest in him. He danced with one. She was grand, but the dance was as far as he could let it go. Afterwards, he walked home alone. He wasn't alone. He had his love for Roisin. There was a girl walking the same road as him. She stumbled a bit like she had too much to drink. He swayed a bit himself. As he walked beside her, he asked if she was all right. Just don't say anything, she said. I won't, he said. When he got to his house, he asked her in for a cup of tea. Everyone else in the house went to bed as soon as they came in. The girl's name was Bridget. They had tea and a spliff and sex on the table. He thought to wait for Roisin, but thoughts soon gave way to sensations. It felt so natural, so good. Bodies touching, sex. Bridget was a much needed godsend. Before she left, she told him where she lived and when her hubby was away. Bizarrely, he felt unfaithful. He was crazy, he told himself. A girl like Roisin would always be in his dreams and his fantasies, where he makes money and has a compatible partner. A girl like Bridget would always be in his life, where he was a bum and get fucked when he was lucky.